welcome to my channel. My name is Emma and I make weekly videos on art, DIYs, and upcycling, so if that interests you, make sure you subscribe. In this video, I'll be showing you how I made these amazing lights out of polymer clay. I actually saw someone on TikTok use these lights to make some sort of floral arrangement and I immediately ordered them off of Amazon. I knew I could make so many cool projects with them and this project came to mind first and I am so thrilled with how it turned out. I swear these clay mushrooms are going to be the next biggest trend. Here's how I made them. To start off, I ordered these lights on Amazon. Technically, they are meant for balloons or party decorations. They last 48 hours, and when you pull this little tab, they turn on, and they're surprisingly bright, and what's nice is you can actually insert that little tab back in there, and they will turn off if you're not using them. I'll also be using this Sculpey Primo clay in the color Translucent. This is by far my favorite brand of clay. It is super good quality, and I will start by warming it up between my hands and working on the stem of the mushroom by rolling it out. One side will be a little bit thicker on the left end, as you can see, and thinner to the right as it gets to the top. Now, I want to make sure this has a nice base, so I'm spreading it out on the bottom so it won't tip over. Now, the most essential part of this mushroom is we're going to make a little cup that's going to go on top of the base that the light can independently sit on. So I rolled a ball of clay and I'm putting it in between my fingers and rotating it to make this little cup shape, shoving my thumbs in there and rotating as I go, and I will attach that to the stem. Make sure you're using your fingers to integrate that clay because we don't want this part falling off. It's important that this cup is tall enough for the light to sit in without bulging over too much. So to test it, you can grab one of the lights and set it into your little crevice and see if it's a good height. This is a pretty good height, but I could go even a little bit shorter. I'll set that aside and start working on the top of my mushroom, and I'm going to do a similar technique for this where I warm it up and roll a ball, then shove my thumbs in there as I rotate it, making sure I'm kind of pulling down with my fingers because I want to come straight down rather than being super wide. I want this to be relatively thin so the light shines through really well. Once I've got it to a good point, I can start flattening out the edge because we want it to almost look like a safari hat where it's a dome at the top and then it gets a little bit straighter as you go out. So I'm putting it between my thumbs and flattening that edge. I worked on it for a while until I was happy with the results. I like to test what I'm working on at every single part of the process, so I took my light under it and it looks nice and even. If it weren't even, you would see some patchiness. I then grabbed this tool from Dollar Tree with these little circles at the end, and I'm just pressing that going down from where the center is to the outside and vice versa, making these tiny lines all the way around my mushrooms, making sure they're all headed towards the center. I'm also making indents on the side. I found that this step is essential in making it look realistic, and I'm just using the neck of my tool to create these indents. Once I have a good base, I'm going to get some chameleon powder, which I got off Etsy. It's color shifting, and I want to take a dry brush and tap off the excess very carefully and rub it on the top and the edges of my mushroom. You want to make sure you're being really careful with the excess because it's kind of hard to get off the wet clay if you have some fallout. As you can see, I have some on the edge, so just be very careful. But of course, we're making nature, and nature isn't perfect, and neither are we. I used the same tool that I was working with earlier to make some textured lines along the stem of the mushroom and some dotted marks along the very base. This will most likely be covered by moss, but it's a nice touch to add. I tested out my shape again and I was pretty happy with it, and I also tested it out with a light. Everything looks good, so now it's time to bake. When you're putting it on the foil, you can create some movement in the top of the mushroom. And for the base of the mushroom, I folded up some foil to keep the middle part elevated so everything ended up being nice and even. I also curved the stem a little bit to give it some extra interest, and then I put it in the oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. I ended up making 5 different sizes of mushrooms in total, and I glued them all to this base, starting with the largest one. I know that one's going to go in the back, so I can glue that one down first, and then I took the rest of them and kind of planned out how I wanted to arrange them before gluing them down, making sure that I had enough space in between them because I need to factor in the caps and I don't want any of them hitting each other. I then glued down the bottoms one by one with some hot glue. Before I moved on, I made sure that all of the tops fit comfortably and there was nothing touching or hitting, so I don't have to move any of the bases, just double checking my work. Always a good thing to do. I then grabbed some moss that is originally from the dollar store and I shoved it in between, making sure it was kind of wrapping around all of the bases and covering all of them. Now, the next step is optional, but I decided to make a butterfly to sit on top of my mushrooms. I'll be using some black Sculpey Primo polymer clay, but you can use the same translucent one and just paint it black, totally up to you. I'm making a tapered shape with a little bit of a round end for the head, and the opposite end tapers thinner. I did make 2 just in case because I wasn't sure how many butterflies I wanted. I'm also rolling out some legs incredibly thin as you can possibly get your clay to roll out. And I'm going to cut that into 6 sections for your legs, although it doesn't hurt to make more just in case. As I put them on the foil, I took this little tool that was able to help me create a tiny bend in the leg to give it the proper shape for a butterfly, and I did that with all of my legs. I also rolled out 2 additional lines that I'm attaching to the body for antennas. Make sure you really push those on there and lay them out how you want them before putting them in the oven. This time I only did 10 minutes because these are so thin. And I know you can barely see them, but I swear they're on that foil. For the wings of the butterfly, I used a material called Duralar that you certainly don't need to have. You can use wax paper or regular paper, but this was one of my favorite materials that I used in college. It's kind of a mixture of plastic and paper, and it's super satisfying to create art with, so it might be worth buying some if you're interested. I sketched out my shapes, making sure they weren't touching because they will overlap eventually, but I want them to be independent shapes first. I then cut them out very carefully and erased any pencil marks. Because they were still attached, I cut them in half, and then I grabbed a brown colored pencil to trace some veining that is normally found on butterflies. It's kind of this little loop shape with lines coming out of it. I just looked up a sample butterfly. You don't have to do this one in particular, but I thought it would look nice with the transparent Duralar. I went back and emphasized the parts where the lines intersected, and then I traced that same design onto the opposite wing. This is the same technique that I'll be using for the bottom wings as well. It's a similar shape with some lines. Once I have all 4 traced, I made sure that I have colored pencil on the back sides too, so every side is covered. Next, I'm going to glue the wings onto the bodies, which turned out so cute. I'm just using a tiny bit of hot glue, and I'm going to do the top wings sandwiched together, and I'm going to do the bottom wings one by one because they kind of go on the outside of the top wings. Now, unfortunately, my hot glue gun is kind of outside the shot for this, but for the legs, I just put the end of the leg into the top of the hot glue gun to get a tiny bit of glue on it and very carefully attach them. They're super light, so they don't require a ton of glue. I put 2 in the front, then 2 in the back, and then I ended up adding another 2 to the front. I used the same technique of dipping in the end of the leg into the hot glue gun and attaching the legs. And then to attach it to the top of the mushroom, I'm going to do that same thing where I get a tiny bit of glue on there and throw that butterfly on my mushroom. Now we're ready to assemble everything together. Just remove the tabs for your lights and you can place them in. Make sure the bright side is facing up. If you want a different look, you can face it down, but I preferred how they look facing up. You can glue them in, but I just sat them there, and I'm actually going to add a tiny bit of hot glue to make sure the tops don't budge as I'm moving it around. Now this is in no way permanent. This is so easy to remove, but this is just for kind of ease of moving it around, filming, setting it up, whatever you want. This is just tacking it on there. But as you can see, I can shake it and it will stay. I am seriously so excited for how these turned out. I think they look amazing as is, but I did thrift a cloche, so I'll show you how it looks with a cloche as well, which is a little glass topper. You can also get these at Target. It looks so good and elegant. It's like a really cool night light, and what's nice is if the lights die, you can just very easily remove those caps, and it looks amazing without the lights as well. The lights are not an essential part to make this awesome. You can glue the lids back on, or of course you can just set them on there if you're not moving it around and shaking it. They are so pretty. I love that iridescent glitter. I'm obsessed. I am so glad I stumbled upon these lights, and I have so many more ideas for them, so make sure you subscribe here and follow me on TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest, all of those things. You know what to do. If you do decide to make this project, please send me a photo, tag me. I love to see when you recreate my ideas. It seriously makes my day. Thank you so much for watching, and happy making.